Hey, all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I am one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shecup, and we are super excited to be back with a lore episode from our over a month long break.
Yeah, and so we're coming up with a character deep dive, but before we tell them who's that, I think we have a guest with us, Shelby.
We do. Welcome, Allison.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for coming on to talk about this character with us.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we are talking about Oghren. He is a character in the fandom that we love to hate. At least a lot of people love to hate. He is definitely an abrasive character, is probably an accurate way of framing him. So I always love when we do character deep dives on the characters that people have strong opinions on, because we get to have dialogue about it, and that's fun. So let's just dive right in. Before I get into the fun facts, does anybody have any preliminary thoughts about Oghren as a character?
No. Oghren has quite literally left 0 impressions on me as a character.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Right. I mean, most of the time I get him in the right before we go to the deep roads, as we'll probably talk about, and then he just sits at camp for the rest of the time. Mainly because I typically play a damage per second warrior, and so I have no use for Oghren in my playthroughs typically.
I have a soft spot for Oghren, which I'll probably talk about later, but I have come to really appreciate him in a way that probably most people don't. But I do understand why most people either have a very neutral or even negative reaction toward him. He's not necessarily a character that was made to be liked.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of phrasing it. Like, he wasn't made to be liked. And I kind of feel like Oghren is a D&D character that's not fully fleshed out. Like, Oghren is what you get when you start session 1. Like, he's got the tragic backstory. He's an asshole. And then on his journey, he becomes and he grows and he's great by the end. And I feel like we don't get the end for Oghren. So, let's just dive right into the fun facts. So, interestingly enough, Oghren is the first of only three characters across all Dragon Age games who are available as a companion in more than one game. So obviously he is available in Origins and Awakening, and then the others include Anders in Awakening and 2, and Varric in 2 and Inquisition. Also, when you go to the Lake Calenhad docks, there is a chance that you get some potential ambient dialogue in the background where Oghren admits to the party that he cannot swim.
Why would he know how to swim?
I mean, right. He's never been to the surface until he goes with you. So, yeah, that makes sense to me. It's just funny to me that they wanted to include that. I don't know. But speaking of, Oghren was actually written by 3 different BioWare writers, Jay Turner, Cheryl Chee, and Mary Kirby. which we'll talk about BioWare writers in the mid-break. So just stay tuned for that, everyone. So something that I was thinking about when I got into this research, when we were like getting into the caste system in Orzammar, is that Oghren's choice to leave the Deep Roads and join the Hero of Ferelden on your quest means that he became a surface dwarf. However, he's not forced to get a face tattoo when he returns to Orzammar. So I just kind of wonder, like, is this a development oversight? Is this a cause of being associated with the Hero of Ferelden? Or is this just like everyone in Orzammar doesn't care about Oghren that much that they don't even care about enforcing their like caste rules on him for leaving the Deep Roads?
For me, it comes down to two things. I think most people, and at least in the canon playthrough, because I feel like we would hear about it if it wasn't, the Anvil of the Void is gone, which means that probably like most people in most world states, Bronca, she's dead, who was a paragon. And so I just think that Orzammar, the nobility, the what's it called? What's their governing little thing called again?
The Assembly?
The Assembly are just like, it's enough. Just go. Just it'll be okay.
I think for me, it's almost like it would not be worth the trouble to even make him get this. It would be so much trouble to try to force him to do this. Let's just hope that he goes away and doesn't bother us anymore.
Yes. Let's just hope he's not like continuing to cause fights in the Diamond Quarter. Like, let's just move on from this. Yeah, I kind of agree with that too. So Oghren also has a very iconic quote in the form of ass chabs. According to the now defunct BioWare social network, Oghren's ass chabs quote was added as a joke between the writers. So this is what it says. It said that David Gator would, quote, at least once or twice a week come into their offices groaning about having chair butt, which is essentially when your butt goes numb from sitting in your chair too long, end quote. Someone then coined the name Association of Chair Butt Sufferers. Its abbreviation, ASCHABS, was then written on their whiteboard. At that time, Jay Turner was writing Oghren, and the word, quote, he said, would be staring at him. So since it sounds like something Oghren would say, he decided to make Oghren actually say it to make sure that ASCHABS was never forgotten, end quote.
I didn't even know that.
It's hilarious. I loved that story. It's just like, you know, just those little like hilarious tidbits behind the scenes. I love that. And then my last fun fact is that in the Hanged Man in Dragon Age 2, you can actually find a painting in game in the Hanged Man of Oghren's concept art. I've put a picture here in the notes and I'll post it in our Discord and on social media for all of you who are listening. But I just thought that was really funny. Like, why did he even ever go to Kirkwall?
And why are they celebrating him so much?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can understand there's like the Hanged Man probably would celebrate someone who like drinks as much as Oghren. So on that level, it makes sense. But any other way I think about it, I'm like, this is absolutely makes no sense.
Maybe they had one of those contests where, you know, if you win the contest, they hang your picture up on the wall. Yes. He drank so many people under the table, they had to give him a portrait.
I mean, I definitely believe that he would win that for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so diving into Oghren's backstory and history a little bit. First and foremost is that we know he was a really well-known member of House Kondrat in Orzammar, even going so far as to be talked about as one of the best warriors of his generation. And his House Kondrat, was part of the warrior caste, but as a family group, they didn't really like dominate the warrior caste. They more flew under the radar. And so he wasn't super high ranking, but like he was still, you could say, prestigious. And he even became pretty popular as a young adult, especially among women, because of his many victories fighting in the provings. Now, the World of Thedas Encyclopedia says this about his fights in the provings, quote, Oghren was an expert at baiting his opponents into making them counter his moves, only to change maneuvers at the last moment to hit them where they were open. His signature moves and flourishes made him exciting to watch, and he soon earned himself a loyal following of devotees, many of whom were female, end quote. And that comes from page 89 if you want to look it up. But the World of Thedas continues talking and even claiming that Oghren could have had his pick of women. But yet there was only one woman that he was interested in. At this point, you might think we're talking about Branka, but in reality, the woman that Oghren was interested in was a dwarven woman named Felsi. Felsi and her family were members of the merchant caste. Unfortunately for Oghren, before he could declare any official interest in Felsi, his family had betrothed him to Branka, as that was seen to be an advantageous match for both houses. At this point in time, Branka she's just a regular, ordinary dwarf. So even though Oghren, was disappointed, and it's probably not what he would have chosen for his life, and even though Branka was an eccentric workaholic, Oghren still felt that their marriage was a happy one, at least in the beginning. However, within a year of their wedding day, Branka was declared a living paragon. And this is when everything kind of goes to hell. Oghren's House Kondrat, voted, and they basically made themselves extinct because they all voted and agreed to change their name to House Branka. So House Kondrat doesn't exist anymore. Now, normally a dwarven man in Oghren's situation would find himself to be a leader in Orzammar, potentially even holding an office such as one of the Deshers, which is one of the lords in the assembly. For Oghren, though, his and Branka's marriage wasn't doing so hot. There was a lot of stress because of her new role as paragon and her tendency to work and try to, be the best she could be. But Oghren is pretty resentful of this, and he starts drinking heavily. Branka disapproves of the drinking, obviously. And so then she begins sleeping with Oghren's cousin Hespeth, and essentially convinced their entire house to shun him. To be fair, we don't know if Oghren was shunned because Branka encouraged it or because the members saw her disdain for him and chose shunning as a punishment. The text was a little bit ambiguous in that matter, but I hate Branka, so I choose to believe that she encouraged it. So that's kind of how their marriage falls apart. When we meet them, he's desperately searching for her, but he tells you that we didn't split on good terms, essentially. That's why he was left behind. But fast forwarding to that part, in 928, as you might remember, Branka takes the entirety of their house into the deep roads to search for the Anvil of the Void. The entire house travels alongside Branka, with one notable exception, and that, of course, is Oghren. So at this point, he basically becomes a laughingstock of Orzammar because they left him behind. Kevin McAllister at Home Alone, he's left behind. So at this point, in an attempt to turn his life around, Oghren goes back and he tracks down Felsi from the beginning, before he was even married to Branka, and he begins a relationship with her. She soon realizes that he's changed. He is not the person she first fell in love with. This is because Oghren continued to be a drunk and made a scene at her father's funeral, after which she promptly dumped him and left for the surface, understandably. After this, Oghren then began drinking even more heavily. than he already was, and he spent his time petitioning the assembly to look for Branca in the deep roads. It was during this time that the youngest son of a Desher named Lord Mano mentioned that it would have been impossible for Branca and her house to have survived for this long in the deep roads. Oghren considered this to be an insult to the Paragon, so he challenged his honor and then killed the man in a first blood duel while he was drunk. He's not making good decisions here. So as a result, Oghren was stripped of his house name and barred from bearing weapons within the city, which is, for him and for a member of the warrior caste is a punishment that's considered to be worse than exile. So, that's all of Oghren's story up to Dragon Age Origins. That's kind of how he gets to be separated from Branca. That's how he meets Branca. All of that is how he gets to where he is in Origins. So when we come back from our mid-break, we will talk about his appearances in the games and what we think about him. But before we do head to the mid-break, anybody have any thoughts about Oghren's backstory so far?
He just gets shit on his whole life. Just no one thinks he'll do anything. He's overshadowed by everyone in his life. I mean, if I was Oghren, I'd probably drink a lot too.
Yeah, he's self-medicating and trying to cope with being a joke and not having his feelings considered about any of the things that have happened to him. And having a terrible wife and a wife that abandons him. Of course he developed a problem. Of course he did, but that's the only thing he knew how to do. And he didn't have any social support. And, I have thoughts that are, for DAO kind of era stuff, but, it makes sense why he's so close to then the warden, because it's like he needs a family. He needs people to care about him. So, absolutely. He has just been so mistreated by his own society.
I was just going to say further proof that 99% of Thedas' problems could be solved by a therapist.
Absolutely, yeah. Speaking as a therapist.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think you're so right when you say that Oghren doesn't know how to do anything except for fight and drink. He's never been taught how to do anything other than fight and drink. So, of course, that's what he's going to do when he gets into these terrible situations. That's all he knows how to do. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Imagine what his life would be like if he had had someone to come alongside him and teach him what friendship looks like, or what it looks like to pick yourself back up when you've been knocked down. We always say things like failure is one of the biggest motivators in life, but it can't motivate you unless you have seen something to be motivated toward. Oghren hasn't.
Is there any Dragon Age, let's just stick to DAO companion that knows how to form relationships in a healthy manner, except for Dog?
I don't think so.
I honestly think if any of them, it's probably Alistair, which is shocking that those words just came out of my mouth. But I think he's remarkably well adjusted considering the circumstances of his life.
Right. Sleeping in a kennel and right. Being raised by dogs. He did well for himself. But yeah, I do think they all have, attachment issues and difficulty making friends and letting people care for them. I think that's a theme among at least the Dragon Age Origin companions for sure.
Guess maybe maybe.
I don't know, man. I feel like she's pretty messed up too.
I think being raised in the circle and the tower really messes someone up, and so even her.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, let's head into the mid-break. Austin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Mhm.
What makes your ram so special?
Well, he's always brought the family luck, and his advice helped us make our fortune.
Your ram offered advice.
How do you get your hair to do that, Dorian? With magic?
With proper hygiene and grooming. Maybe all three of you should get acquainted.
Kirkwall's not brown enough for me. But hey, no darkspawn.
Ferelden wasn't that brown. The dirt and muck gave it character.
Well, welcome to the middle of the show where we talk about all the things that have to do with the podcast, but not the lore. And so it's here where we thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons, but especially those patrons who joined us during our break. And that includes Andy, Bellarina, Erwin W, Becky Done. That's what I'm going with. And then Emil E. And so thank you so much for your support and welcome to the Patreon. Also, special thank you to our first patrons, which was Genesis and Lisa M. To be fair, Genesis used to be a Holocron patron and she was Genesis. TH. That's not what happened there. I didn't confuse it. I just had a problem. And Lisa M. is the other first patron. And then also a special thank you to our Nug King, Lewis H. If you would want to join us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/DALorecast and join us there. If you can't support us financially, we totally get that. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. And we do have an Apple review to read today. So this comes from Apple. It comes from Angel AK Chubbs. It says, love the podcast, 5 stars. Hey, Dragon Age Lorecast. I love your podcast. It's great to hear the lore. You both speak out. I've been playing Dragon Age for a while, and I've never tried to learn the lore until I landed on your podcast. I always listen to it now when I'm working or anytime I get the chance to. Thanks so much for the review. And then lastly, come hang out with us on Discord on the Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. You can talk about Dragon Age. You can talk about our other show, the Assassin's Creed Lorecast. You can come talk about Star Wars with the Holocron Histories podcast. Talk about if you are playing Baldur's Gate because you are waiting for Dragon Age to come out, and this is the closest thing that you're going to get, which is Baldur's Gate 3. We have been talking about that game for forever, since day one of its release. So if you want to talk about that, come onto the Discord server, and if it is filling that Dragon Age shaped hole in your heart, please come and share with us. And then lastly, we kind of have a not so fun topic to talk about here for a minute. We talked at length about this, as we guessed it, on the Mass Effect Lorecast. So if you want to go over there and talk about, basically, we talked about the BioWare layoffs and a lot of theories, but we wanted to address it a little bit on this show. And so if you're not aware, a couple weeks ago, there was a big announcement from BioWare that they were firing a good chunk of people from their staff. And when the list came out, it seemed like it was very heavily on the writer's side. It isn't entirely all writers, but there is a good portion that are writers that have been laid off. Again, we talk about the details more in depth on the episode of the Mass Effect Lorecast, so definitely check that out. But Shelby, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
I have things to say. Y'all know me. Y'all know that I'm going to speak out on things that I think are wrong, and I think this is wrong. So there are layoffs. Some are unavoidable. EA, they announced back in March that they were doing layoffs. So it's not just a BioWare thing. However, again, of course, this doesn't bode well for BioWare. But I just wanted to take a minute to thank the people that have been laid off. So I kind of compiled a list of the ones, and this is not everyone. This is just the ones I could find on like Twitter and stuff. So Mary Kirby, who is the writer of characters like Varric, Loghain, Vivian, Meryl, Sten, and others, hired in 2006.
Oghren, too.
Yes, Oghren, thank you. Lucas Christensen, writer of many characters, and has been with BioWare since Baldur's Gate 1. Been there over 25 years, referred to as Writer Alpha because he's just that prolific. John Renish, technical director. He was hired in 2015. Brian K. Lee, Tim Griffith, Amy Mallon, Andrew Lung, Renata Cronin, Andre Garcia, Stefan Lipsius, Andrew Stedman, Corey White, Chance Clark, Eric Wong, John Morris, hired way back in 2009, Shane Gaudry, Alexander G. Scott, been there for almost 14 years, Emily Taylor, Mo Namazi, Nicholas Tallman, and many more. Thank you so much to all of you who have put your heart and soul into making the games we love. We genuinely appreciate your hard work and hope you land on your feet. And then I also wanted to say that on Twitter/X and Blue Sky, you can find an account called Crew and Companions. Their @name is Crew Companions. You can also find them via the hashtag #HireThe50. They are an account made up of Dragon Age and Mass Effect fans, gamers like us, who are boosting links and profiles to those who have been laid off in hopes that they will be hired by another company. If you're listening to this show, go and give their account a follow and repost or two. Again, their handle is Crew and Companions, and you can find them via the hashtag #HireThe50. That's it. My soapbox is over.
Yeah. Again, if you want some more thoughts, go check out the Mass Effect Lorecast. And, if you're a big BioWare fan and those games, check out the Mass Effect Lorecast anyway, because it's a really great show and we like them over there. But I think we're ready to get back to Oghren.
Yeah, let's do it.
Have a care where your eyes linger, Alistair.
Yes, well, don't worry. It's not what you think.
I see.
I was looking at your nose.
And what is it about my nose that captivates you so?
I was just thinking that it looks exactly like your mother's.
I hate you so much.
I was one of the crows you hired to kill the Grey Wardens.
I thought you looked familiar.
Well, I just wanted to report that I failed my mission, Logan.
You don't say.
I'm terribly broken up over it.
Well, thank you kindly for informing me.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Okay, so let's talk about origins. So basically what I covered before the mid-break is everything we know about Oghren leading up to when we meet him in Origins. So when the hero of Ferelden shows up and meets Oghren, we see him in the midst of an argument, of course, in the Diamond Quarter. And you can talk to him and ask him questions about this, but he doesn't really trust you, and he doesn't think that any interest you have in him or in Branka is real. So basically, whatever you do, whatever dialogue choices you choose, if you keep talking to him, he eventually tells you to, quote, sod off, which I personally need to incorporate that into my own personal vocabulary a bit more. Great quote. But Oghren only becomes a member of your party when you go into the Deep Roads, like officially, to find Branka and get her support. He won't really talk to you about anything substantial until after this quest has been completed. He's also very eager to reunite with Branka, but when he learns the truth of what has happened, which is that they basically have been destroyed and it's just bad news, but bad news bears all around. He is shocked. He's also shocked by Carradine, just all the things that happen in that quest. He does disapprove if you side with Carradine, because obviously that means you have to kill his wife. But after a new king ascends to the throne in Orzammar, he realizes that there's really nothing left for him in Orzammar and joins the Warden permanently. And that's when you can kind of talk to him about Branka, about life, about everything that he's struggling with, basically. And then in Origins, there's also a side quest that you can do with him, which I have never done this mostly because I don't get him until so late. The Orzammar quests are the last ones I do, so I usually don't have time to build up his approval. I don't think I'm the only one in that situation either. But his side quest is basically he gets to a point where he regrets how he handled his relationship with Felsi, and you can basically get them to link up again and make up. you can also choose to not do that. Like you can do the quest and make them hate each other more. That is an option for any of you who are out there playing monster playthroughs. I wouldn't recommend it personally, but to each their own. It is an RPG. But that is most of his story in Origins. I would be remiss if I did not say that he has one of the best quotes in all of Origins, up there in all of Dragon Age, in my opinion. But we'll get into that at the very end when we talk about quotes. So, anybody have thoughts before we move on to Awakening?
I think what you said about not having time to get his approval is so true, because a lot of us do save the deep roads for last. I just want to say there is one point where I went to Orzammar first in the thing, and it's when I played a dwarven noble, and I wanted to go back there to basically be like, look, bitches, I'm alive.
And did you do Oghren's side quest on that playthrough?
I did not. I have never done Ogren's side quest.
I know it is bugged on some, in some certain situations too, so that's probably another factor.
Is there a companion quest that's not bugged?
Probably not.
No, and I was going to add too, I think in order to get Oghren's approval high enough, you have to give him a bunch of alcohol. The only gifts you can really give him are alcohol.
Yeah.
And so and he's also someone who is really difficult to read as far as what he's going to approve of and what he's not. I found myself multiple times in both Origins and Awakening getting disapproval from him when I said something that I thought he was going to approve of. So I actually feel like his affinity is difficult to get unless you're just gifting him with alcohol 20 times in a row. And I think I've seen a lot of people feel that way also. Either they just can't stomach talking to him because some of the interesting choices that were made as far as how he treats especially like women, but also just that they don't want to feel like they have to enable his addiction to be his friend. And that's especially true in Origins. I think I feel like it gets better in Awakening. Some people disagree, but that was probably my biggest gripe with his affinity. And I think that's probably why more people don't get it and then get to the point where you can reintroduce him to Felsi.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's also another issue I have with Oghren is that like he literally is an alcoholic. Like we'll talk about this later again, but he is an alcoholic. Like that is clinically like he could be diagnosed like, you know, with a substance use disorder, right? And it feels wrong to me now to go and like encourage that behavior. So I don't know. I don't like it.
I do think it's a product of the time that it was written in, you know, so there are lots of characters like Oghren back in the early 2000s, but it still kind of sucks in retrospect.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
If you do have the DLC option and you want to go with the thoughtful gift options, you could use that to raise approval without having to give him alcohol. But I also think those are bugged in that if you use too much of them, they don't trigger the proper side quests.
Yeah. There's a lot of bugs with Origins. That's why we need a remaster. I will say that a million times. But anyway, so let's get into Awakening. So Oghren's story is not over at the end of Origins. He does appear as a companion in Awakening, and there is the potential, in my opinion, for a lot of growth in him. I think for me, I'm one of those people, I think that he has regressed in Awakening, but I think the reason I say that is not necessarily because of like his story points. It's because of his like random dialogue. Like to me, he's even more of an alcoholic. In Awakening, he's even more offensive to women in Awakening than he is in Origins. But I think the actual plot points of Awakening way better. For sure agreed on that point. So let's get into them. So in between Origins and Awakening, Oghren settles down with Felsi regardless of what happens in the Oghren's Old Flame quest that we just talked about. They do end up having a child, and those who knew Oghren say that he was truly happy during this time. Unfortunately, he did soon return to drinking, and he basically was dwelling on his own insecurities and his faults and even his failures. According to the World of Thedas Encyclopedia, he dropped the baby twice while he was intoxicated, at which point he realizes, I'm not fit to be a father. I am the worst parent of all time. Goodbye. And so he leaves. He left Felsi and the baby basically without telling them anything. And so he travels to Amaranthine to then join the Grey Wardens. So this is obviously when you meet Oghren in Awakening. He's there to join the Wardens because of the hero of Ferelden's influence. And if you do allow him to undergo the joining, which you have a choice as the player character, he does survive and he becomes a fully fledged warden. He also drinks the entire goblet during the joining. So it's just a really funny scene. Disgusting, but pretty funny. And then during the DLC, Felsi pursues him and tries to find him and fairly, absolutely, rightfully accuses him of being a deadbeat dad and asks him, what are you going to do about our kid? You have a responsibility and an obligation. And so Oghren will come to you and ask you what he should do if his approval is high enough. And so as the warden commander, you can either encourage him to take a more active role or not. I always am going to encourage him, hey, yeah, you should be a better dad kind of thing. Because I think that that's what he wants. I think he's just looking for someone to validate that in him and say yeah, you have the potential to be a good dad after all. And then with the architect, Oghren actually supports siding with the architect. He argues that it's worth the risk if the sentience allows the Darkspawn to stop assaulting Orzammar, which, still a major problem. I'm not sure sentience would allow that, but I completely understand, once again, where Oghren's coming from on that one. Now, you may know, if you're listening to this, that you can kill Oghren as the warden in Dragon Age Origins. So they do actually address this in Awakening. You can basically ask him about it as the warden commander. And he claims that he woke up with nothing, no clothes on, and just compliments the warden commander for attempting to kill him.
Times better than Lyrium Ghost Liliana.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
Good job trying. I commend your efforts.
Right. I mean, it is on brand. It is lore accurate for Oghren. We can't say that he wouldn't do that. He would. That's fair.
Yeah.
So the last plot point I want to talk about before we get into quotes and other things, is in the end, just before the siege of Vigil's Keep, Oghren writes a letter to his child. And you can find it in the World of Thedas Encyclopedia. And I just wanted to read it because it's very touching. It's titled, "We Don't Live Very Long." And this is what it says. "Hey there, Nugget. It's your da. You probably don't remember me, and that's good. You're better off with just your ma. She's a good one. You hang on to her. There's a big fight coming up, and I thought I should say this before I lose the chance to say it at all. I'm a Grey Warden now, and there's really no way around it. We don't live very long. If not tomorrow, it'll be soon. I just feel it. Nugget, I want to say that I'm sorry I left. I want the best for you, even if it doesn't seem like it sometimes or all the time. But it's true. You were the only good thing that came out of Oghren after all's said and done. Not being there was the best I had to give. Maybe if your ma's all right with it, you can ask her to tell you about the first time we met when I was a real warrior. I didn't do right by her. I'm trying to do right by you. And then it ends with a dwarven quotation. I'm not going to try to say it, but we don't know what the first sentence says. And the last sentence is a formal farewell.
I think that his entire crux, like the crux of his character, comes out in that letter. You can feel the insecurity and the feeling like he's not worth anything and he's better off not there at all than being there and messing things up or making things worse. I think that exemplifies like who Oghren is, and why he does the things he does. I think that's great.
I agree. I just find this letter so heartbreaking because he literally says, "You were the only good thing that came out of Oghren." And to me, it's so heartbreaking to see someone who has that little self-worth. I don't know many people who would truly believe that there's nothing redeemable about themselves. Nothing. And that it's sad to me. It's very sad.
I think it comes down to like Oghren as a whole, and I can talk more about this, but he's just like perfect example of like what we call like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like he's told his whole life basically that like, oh, we're gonna make fun of you, you're not really good, oh, Bronca's so great, oh, all of this, yeah, you're a good warrior, but everyone else around you is so great, you're not worth anything, oh, you're a disgrace to your family, you didn't go searching for the anvil, Bronca hates you, all of this thing, and he becomes what they say he is. He doesn't start that way, but he becomes what they are trying to say that he is.
Yeah, and you can't undo that type of and that intensity of social conditioning in just a few months of traveling with people who actually care about you. It makes sense that he regresses in Awakening because he was away from the people who helped him start to heal. And so he doesn't start to progress again until he's around those people. And now and this is something that I have talked about at length in different places, but he actually fits in with the Awakening cast more than he fit in with the Origins cast. They are a bunch of social misfits. You have Nathaniel, who is a pariah. His family's hated by society. His dad was evil. You have Valana, who was a social outcast among the Dalish, and now her clan is dead and her sister's gone. You have Sigrun, who is dead, basically. She's a dead woman. Anders is an apostate. And then you've got Justice, who isn't even a person. And they're all social misfits. They're all outcasts, and they all have this kind of sense of, I don't belong anywhere. I don't have a social support. And so they understand Oghren in a way that I don't think the Origins companions did, because they all, at least most of them, had something. They had someone, somewhere to turn to. And so the DAA companions, in my experience, they're just much more, I feel like they're much more open to Oghren and much more compassionate with him. One of my favorite interactions is with him and Nathaniel, which I love Nathaniel, so that's kind of par for the course. But Nathaniel just gives him compliments. He's like, wow, you're such a great warrior. You're so skilled. Where did you learn to do that? And Oghren does not know what to do. He thinks Nathaniel is making fun of him because he's not used to people saying nice things to him and meaning it, and it not being a joke or have, something like some kind of backhanded compliment. And so I think, and I hope that Awakening is just the beginning of Oghren's growth and his story, as opposed to the end point. Like, I think if he survives, if he makes it, then hopefully because now he's a Grey Warden and he has these people for life. They're his family now. Hopefully they can support him through the relapses and different things that he needs that support from, and he can actually grow as a person. So the beginning of Oghren's story as opposed to the end of it.
I enjoy that. And I had never really thought about that, about the companions before. I think that's a great point. And reflecting on origins a little bit, I think it makes a little bit more sense now to think about Oghren and Zevran's friendship, because they are probably the closest. Zevran is probably the closest friend that Oghren has other than the warden. And, Zevran doesn't have anyone either. He has nothing. He was ready to die when you meet him. And so I think that makes a lot more sense now, because I've always just kind of thought, oh, well, they're just friends. They just put them together as friends to make the Legolas and Gimli jokes. But, no, I think there's an actual legitimate reason for it.
Well, and I think just as like a fandom in general, we do like to hate on Oghren. Again, I'm kind of indifferent to him, but I also didn't know this. But, we look at Liliana and we look at Alistair, and, they're the fragile people that must be protected. Like, and not to say that they haven't had their own sense of tragedy, because they absolutely have. But is it because, Alistair is somewhat well adjusted to his circumstance that we judge him less harshly than we judge Oghren? Alistair's whiny. Alistair is, kind of looks at like, oh, the world has not been kind to me, so screw the world. It's just that Oghren is older and takes a more drastic approach to dealing with that than Alistair does.
Yeah, Oghren's had to deal with it a lot longer. Like, Alistair's 20. He's not even done growing up yet.
No.
So, I agree. I think, in general, people, we just tend to have a more sympathetic view of characters like Alistair, than we do of characters like Oghren. But just to add to, I do think that Oghren, his writing is not necessarily, there's some problematic components to it. He was written to be a joke, that was intentional, and it was a product of the time, and it's hard to kind of correct that after that's how it was started. No matter who wrote it after that, they were left to kind of, you had to kind of commit to the bit, had to go with it. This is who Oghren is. And so you either get this chance to redeem him or make him worse. And so unfortunately, he just becomes this running joke. His alcoholism is supposed to be hilarious rather than sad. And so I do think that impacts how sympathetic people feel to him. And he also is misogynistic and gross. And that's how some real people are. Some real people, like, it's not always this tidy, neat picture of a person, and all of their flaws are due to the alcoholism. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. And so I definitely never fault people for not liking him, because he is gross. I just think that when everything that we've talked about today, all of what happened to him, and understand why he is the way he is, it's easier to be sympathetic towards him and hope for better, and that he will grow as his life kind of goes on.
And I would just add, I think we have a tendency in fandom and in just real life, perhaps, to write people off when they do something we disagree with. And like, I'm not advocating for us to stay in relationships where people who abuse us, but like, people are messy and people do things that we disagree with, and it's still worthy and worthwhile to have a relationship with them, even if we disagree with them, not when they're literally like abusing you. But people are messy, people do things, and I think as a person, like, I think we should have compassion for people who are going through hard things, who have had hard things happen to them. And I think that Oghren is one of those people. I think sometimes it's hard for us to see past like the labels that we put on them. but Oghren is a person who's had hard things in his life. And I'm not necessarily saying that we should ignore all the shitty things he does. I don't think that we should ignore the misogynistic comments. I don't think that's okay. But I think that we can still have compassion for people and for characters who have had horrible things happen to them, and also, understand like, okay, this is misogynistic, you can be better. Like we can hold both things in our hands, and I think a lot of times in fandom we
it's very
can't
black
do
or
that.
white.
Yeah
But yeah, sometimes there's just not room for nuance, and it's unfortunate because I think about these other characters who are messy and who do problematic things that people have so much grace for and compassion for. Like I love Anders, but he's messed up and he's done some messed up stuff, including some cannibalism. But he's very popular. Same thing with like Cullen, controversial, but he does tend to have a more positive fan experience than Oghren. So it's interesting, and maybe it's just like the way that fandom has grown as a whole since Origins to Inquisition. Maybe we're a little more tolerant of people having some challenges and some maybe negative qualities. But I do think it's interesting. And I do wish that we could explore these topics without it having to be, yes, I like this character. That does not mean that I endorse the way he behaves. I just think he's interesting. Like I also like Rendon Howe. I think he's a great character with a great voice. I hate him. He's a good character. Right. So it's like there's room for that in media and in fandoms for those medias. And Oghren's just a good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, if we want to get real about, a lot of characters take a lot of hate for how they treat mages or their response to mages. I'm looking at Cullen, I'm looking at Cassandra, at Fenris, at Vivian. But one of the most beloved companions of all time, which is Morrigan, recommends that you just kill the entire circle because they're weak.
They're not good
and
enough.
She's a mage.
Right.
She is a mage. Like, yeah. I always find it so interesting who fandom chooses are like the golden boys and girls, and who like they can't be criticized. But when other characters that are like not the popular ones do the exact same thing, it's like, do you not see that this is hypocritical?
I think that with a few exceptions, Dragon Age companions fall into two categories, which I'm going to call the Anders and Fenris category, which the Anders category is like, oh, you seem all right. But then you start talking to them and you're like, what is going on here? Hold the phone. And then there's the Fenris category, which is like, what the heck are you talking about? Oh, I get it now.
It's the trauma.
It's trauma.
Yeah, trauma. And I think Oghren falls into the Fenris category of like, he gets in there and you're like this, and you're like, oh, you have some deep-seated societal and family trauma that you need a licensed therapist to work through.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely. Allison, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Oghren before we get into kind of like the quotes and wrapping it up?
I think I went hard in my discussion just a minute ago about all the points that I probably would have brought up here. Just to kind of reiterate, I guess, I really, Oghren is just such an interesting kind of character. I do think I wish that he was handled a little bit differently. And that's kind of where, fix-it fan fictions come in and you make things the way you wanted them to go. But I definitely, I think that he's worth dealing with the misogynistic lines that he says, some of the grosser things he says, just to see some of his growth. And also he's got some real bangers of lines. He's got a really big heart, and he wants to be loyal, and he wants someone to be loyal to. And so I think even if it's just once, it's worth it to just explore his character and give him a chance to kind of, just so you can see, what he was meant to be, as opposed to the first impression that we get, which is not fantastic.
Yes, very much agree. So speaking of that, on that note, we've pretty much gone through his whole story. He technically can survive the siege, but we don't know what happens to him if he does. So moving on to some quotes. I think this is the quote that I alluded to earlier. I think this is perhaps one of the best quotes, definitely top 5 Dragon Age quotes, like of all time, in my opinion. And Oghren says, it's at the very end, right before the battle with the Archdemon. And they're like one by one final thoughts with you. He says, "This is it, Warden. When from the blood of battle the stone has fed, let the heroes prevail and the blighters lay dead. As one of the blighters, I sodding salute you. Let's show them our hearts and then show them theirs."
I love it.
It's so good. It's so good. Like, just, it's so badass. And like, it really does show, like, he has a warrior's heart. Like, it just is who he is. And so, him being exiled and like not being able to be a warrior anymore probably was like devastating for him.
And I think 2 things about this quote before we move on. I think the big thing for me, at least, is one, I think this is up there with as much punch as I've seen the Throne of the Gods and it was empty.
Yes.
Like, it's a big thing, but it also shows that Oghren at this point it's not just about, this nihilistic nothingness point for him anymore. The point of like, let's show them our hearts. Let's show them that we're not going to go down fighting, that we're not just going to lay over and let the dark spawn take us. And then let's show them that we're going to win. It shows that Oghren at this point has decided that not only is the world worth fighting for, but he is worth fighting for, which is a big moment for him.
Great point.
Yeah, this is actually, there was a trend going around TikTok a couple of years ago where it was like, name your favorite video game quote. And this was the one. It's the "let us show them our hearts and then we'll show them theirs." It's one of my favorite quotes of all time.
It's a good one.
From a character that's a lot of the time forgettable for most people. So it's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. So then I just have 2 more quotes. I think this one's funny. I always include a funny one. He says, "That pot-bellied son of a whore Tegan said that I can't drink a whole barrel of pickle juice without passing out first. I aim to prove him wrong." And
but
then
he did.
Yeah. And then lastly, he says, "You can take a warrior out of the fight, but you can never take the fight out of the warrior," which I just feel like perfectly captures his personality. So I decided to kind of do this characteristics, like personality thing. I know we normally don't, but I just feel like for a character that so many people dislike, it's important to bring up some of his characteristics. So like, obviously he's an alcoholic. We've already diagnosed him. Yes. He is intensely self-loathing. He has major feelings of regret and shame, but he's also very funny. Like, he has a lot of heart. And he also uses humor to perhaps cover up the pain that he's feeling. I sometimes feel like in this research, I've just been looking at a like case study from the DSM-5 or something. Just because he like has so many issues. But yeah, so Oghren is not, I guess I just want to say that I feel like I have changed my mind a little bit about him. Like, I don't hate him anymore. And And that kind of leads me into my last and final thing, which is, why do we love or hate this character? I would say for me personally, before I did this research, I would always be like, oh, Oghren, I hate him. Like, he's the worst character in this game, which may still perhaps be true. But I don't necessarily hate him anymore. I just feel bad for him. Like, he's had a terrible hand dealt, and he hasn't made the best of it, that's for sure. But he's had a hard life, so I just feel for him. But what about y'all? Why do you love or hate him?
I think my indifference to Oghren solely comes from the fact that most of the time he is the last party member recruited. And I just do not have the bandwidth in the playthrough to go and do all the conversations about it. But because once I get to the deep roads, and when you're done with the deep roads, it feels like you have the whole scene that's reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, where they see the Nazgul on there and you see the Archdemon. It feels very like, oh crap, we need to go and handle this. So I think that's where I just don't know, because I didn't have the time or bandwidth at the end of the playthrough to kind of do that.
And I think we have one of each. I love Oghren. But I think I am a psychologist by trade. Some of my favorite people, some of my favorite human beings in real life are messy and broken, and have a lot of negative qualities. I love misfits and people who aren't well liked. And so I love when I can dig into a character's backstory and kind of see it from that angle. Oghren is a classic example of how a lot of people who experience trauma throughout their lives end up resorting to alcoholism to self-medicate because they don't have social support. And so I just think he's really fun and really interesting to explore. I don't think he's a good person. I don't think that any of his issues are excuses for his own failures and his own choices, especially some of the more problematic ones. But I do love the story that was put into him and kind of what he exemplifies. So I love him because he's interesting to me, really, is what it boils down to.
Yeah. In my headcanon, the reason that Oghren isn't present in the rest of the games is because he went back to be a dad. And that's where he is. That's my headcanon. Of and BioWare, if you're listening, don't mess with that. And bring him as he's that. Just let me have his happy ending. It's the same thing. Let Cullen go off and go back to Honleaf and sit by the lake and be happy. That's all I want.
Oghren's backstory for me is he's a part-time warden after everything's over. He comes in, he helps every so often, and then he goes on leave and goes and spends time with his family, and then he comes back and he updates all the wardens on the things that his kids are doing. And they all kind of rib him a little, look at you being a good dad. And that's my headcanon.
I enjoy that. I need that in a fan fiction now, and I never thought I would read a fan fiction about Oghren. So that's fun.
Oghren and the Warden Reserves.
Yes, I like that. I like that a lot. So, this is pretty much the end of the episode. I feel like we've made a good case for why Oghren is not the absolute worst. So if you're listening, and you still hate him, feel free to hop in the Discord and argue with us. That's totally fine. We're still here for that. But before we finish up and wrap up for the evening, Allison, I wanted to give you just kind of the chance to plug anything you have going, whether it's a stream or anything that you're doing.
I don't currently have much going on. If you're interested in the things I have to say, I do a lot of meta posting on Tumblr and Twitter, I have a hard time calling it X, but and I by the same name, Allisondraste. Right now, I'm playing Baldur's Gate, so that's what all of my content is about. But if anyone's interested, they can find me there. I like to talk to people, so.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for coming on the show. I definitely love to have you on. And maybe we'll have you on again in the future.
Anytime.
All right. Well, before we go, a special thank you to you, Allison, for being here and talking with us. Another special thank you to our Nug King, Lewis H., who gets thanked at the end of every episode. And thank you to all of you who listen to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
I'm your host, Maverick Stone.
It's me, Gingerino42.
I'm Romer.
Hey, this is Sassy Lady.
And I'm Jaxus. And we are the Fallout Roundtable. Join us as we explore various topics from the Fallout universe, brought from multiple perspectives. We can be found on your favorite podcatchers, from Spotify to iTunes, or follow us on Twitter at FalloutRTB, or our email, falloutrtb@gmail.com. Be sure to rate, follow, and subscribe. Thank you.